Well, good morning from Los Angeles, and welcome to our conversation, Oncology at a Crossroads. I am Dr. Julien Willard, pediatric ophthalmologist and a life sciences strategist, and also an advisor to private equity firms and senior executives in biotech in big pharma. And today I have my guest, a friend and a colleague, Dr. Oliver Overhoor, a German oncologist, currently a senior associate at Duke Capital Partners and an MBA student in Duke's Fuqua School of Business. Oliver, great to have you here.
Thanks, Julien, and good morning, everyone. So excited to be here. I've got my European-sized coffee with me, and I'm happy to talk with you.
Fantastic. And I have my jasmine tea with me as well. So, well, you and I clearly both love to learn and go to school. And we both left clinical medicine for the dark side, for the corporate sector. I left pediatric ophthalmology for health and pharmaceutical economics. And you've got this fascinating background. You're trained as a hematologist oncologist in Germany. You published research on COVID vaccination and cancer patients. And now you are at Duke working in biotech investing. So that gives you a very unique perspective on what we're discussing today.
Yeah, I think so. I believe that we're talking about like oncology and biotech is a pretty complex field, and it doesn't hurt to have several angles that you can assess things from. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, let's start with a big picture. So when you hear oncology at a crossroads, what does this really mean for you? And from your clinical days when you were an oncologist in the clinic to where you sit now, what is the biggest shift that you are seeing in the industry?
Well, great question. I think like we could probably talk about different crossroads in oncology that we're facing, but when I hear crossroads in oncology, I probably think about the clinical perspective first and how I believe that the clinical treatment landscape will drastically change over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And I know people have probably said that for the last 5, 10, 15 years already. But I think we've seen some great advances across all of those new treatment modalities out there that are coming. And there's another reason why I think that this time might actually be the time where we're going to see this shift, which is that a lot of established therapies, I mean, we've been talking a lot about Keytruda over the last month, are kind of rushing towards their patent cliff. So now there's actually an incentive out there to bring new treatments to market.
And if I ask you a personal question, so you made this shift from clinical medicine to the private sector. What pushed you to make that shift?
Well, actually, exactly kind of this that I've seen all the great new technologies coming to the clinic, like for example, CAR Ts. I've seen those in practice, and I felt I kind of want to switch away from treating just one patient in front of me to kind of helping bring those treatments to all of those patients.
Yeah, and I relate to that. For me, leaving pediatrics was about realizing that I was more frustrated with the day-to-day grind than actually energized by it. So I kept thinking there had to be a way to make a bigger impact. So that's what pulled me toward health economics and into diplomatic service. And I really wanted to work on a global scale, influencing how medicines get developed, how they get priced and accessed across entire systems, not just one patient at a time. So when I look at oncology today, I'm actually asking, how do we build sustainable systems that can actually deliver on these innovations? For example, I'm very passionate about the sustainable systems for biosimilars market, which is very much relevant to the oncology conversation. And because if we can't figure out the economics and the access piece, we're not really at a crossroads. We're really at a dead end, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of like you said, I think sometimes it's an overused phrase, but impact is definitely what you can have on a larger scale beyond clinical practice. But it needs we need both people, like
Mhm.
being on the bad side, but also beyond.
I agree. So there's a growing debate now in oncology about what our clinical trials are really measuring, right? On one side, you've got people arguing that surrogate endpoints allow faster patient access, especially in areas of high unmet need and for rare diseases. But on the other side, there are people who criticize this approach, and the critiques point out that most new cancer drugs approved on ORR or other surrogate endpoints never go on to show robust overall survival gains, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic. I think that, like, I personally, I'm a big proponent of both accelerated approvals and surrogate endpoints, and this might be controversial, but I'll give you like two reasons why I think it's a good thing. First, patients value optionality, and we have a lot of indications out there where we don't have a lot of treatment options. So, bringing treatments to market faster is a good thing from that perspective. And the other thing is, of course, in an ideal world, we would like to see overall survival improvements. But also from a clinical perspective, we know that overall survival is not everything. And especially in advanced settings, patients value quality of life, for example, often over overall survival. And if you take, for example, progression-free survival, this often translates into improved quality of life for at least for a certain period of time. Because if your disease
Mhm.
does not progress, you have a less of a symptom burden. So I think both accelerated approvals and surrogate endpoints deserve to play a role in oncology.
Mhm.
Um, Also, overall survival is not always the most practical or even feasible endpoint to measure in several settings. That being said, of course, we want to look at overall survival in the end, but that probably just means that we need to do a better job, like with post-approval studies or confirmatory trials. But it does not, in my opinion, necessarily mean that we need to abandon accelerated approvals or surrogates.
But at the same time, we're seeing that now regulators, such as FDA and sponsors, are caught between this need for rapid approvals and the responsibility to prove these surrogate measures are rigorously validated, transparently reported. So in my mind, this is one of the biggest crossroads oncology is facing right now. And the question that I have for you is, are we actually making things better for the patients, or we're just making things easier for sponsors?
Well, again, in an ideal world, making things easier for the sponsor would hopefully translate into things being beneficial for patients. But yeah, I don't really have an absolute answer to that. I believe what companies, what sponsors needs is a reliable partner in this whole journey of bringing drugs to market, and just clear guidelines. Whether the FDA is saying, okay, we like accelerated approval or not, that's not really the issue, but they need to be consistent so that you have some reliability and can actually plan ahead.
Okay. And from the clinician standpoint, so you've been a doctor enrolling patients in clinical trials. I participated myself as a clinical investigator in the Avastin trial many years ago for retinopathy of prematurity. So now you and I both are looking at this from the investment side, from the buy and sell side. So does that change how you view these design trade-offs? And do you see them any differently now than you did in the clinic?
Definitely. I'd say that when I was in practice and I was talking to a patient about clinical trials, I would only care about that particular patient right in front of me, and on how can I get this patient to enroll in this trial if I think this trial is a good choice for them. I did not really care about like the bigger picture at this point, but taking a step back from the bedside kind of made me realize, okay, it's not always just about this one particular patient. Of course it is also about
Mhm.
this patient, but clinical trials are a way to advance science and help bring treatments to not only one but all of the patients.
Okay, so now let's talk about the regulatory landscape that is associated with the oncology at a crossroads. There is a lot of regulatory turbulence. happening right now in the industry. Let's talk specifically FDA. So accelerated approval has been getting a lot of heat lately. You and I wrote about this on LinkedIn extensively. Tighter confirmatory trial requirements, more scrutiny on follow through. So, from both your clinical and business perspective, how do you see this playing out? Is this a correction the field needed, or is it going to slow down innovation in the industry here in the United States in general?
Well, you're right. There's definitely a lot going on at the FDA since about spring. And I think it's not only about accelerated approval or surrogates or whatever. It's just about the bigger picture that we are seeing in that the signals that the FDA is sending are not very consistent. There's a lot. I think you call it turbulence. That's nicely put. I mean, is that with like you've got a new SIBA director, next day you don't, and then he's back again. FDA issuing CRL, so complete response letters, drug rejections left and right for drugs that would have probably been approved like less than a year ago. And at the same time, companies like you hear from companies or people like companies that the previous communication with the FDA was totally different. Like they did not expect those. And that is, I think, the biggest issue, that this is causing a tremendous amount of uncertainty. You have the FDA commissioner saying, okay, we want to make drugs, especially for rare diseases, bring to market, approve them on the, I think that's kind of verbatim at the first sight of a plausible mechanism. And the next day you see a rejection of a drug that has a pretty good phase 2 or phase 3 data package, and you don't know where you're at anymore. Like I said, you need the FDA and companies to be reliable partners for each other, so you can act in the best interest of patients, both from a safety and efficacy perspective. But you cannot really change the rules mid-game. This is definitely causing a lot of uncertainty, and you need to be able to plan ahead.
I see this policy uncertainty conversation almost several, I have this conversation with clients almost several times a week. And it's also interesting to see how LinkedIn now is inundated with discussions around artificial intelligence and how we're going to, better our business. What's interesting is the clients actually say that, yeah, we can invest into top line revenue opportunities. We can pursue some cool things that are potentially patient facing and such. But because of this policy uncertainty and turbulence, we would rather focus on something, low hanging fruit, the productivity things that doesn't really change anything for the company, right? Which is very interesting. So I think for the from the investor community perspective, I'm hearing that this policy uncertainty really needs to come to an end for the industry to start thriving again, and in particular the oncology segment as well. So another question that I have for you. So I'm hearing this question constantly from the private equity and venture capital firms that I work with. What does stricter FDA oversight mean for the development pipeline? And since you're now at Duke Capital, what are you telling your partners at Duke Capital? Is this actually changing the investment strategy?
Great question. I think it's more about, again, like the bigger picture. It's less about the individual cases, but I mean, we hear all about the current investment landscape and all the sentiments out there, IPO window being shut, big pharma derisking, VC funding drying up. And it's kind of understandable. If you don't know what's the path ahead for the next 6 to 12 months for this particular drug that you want to invest in, will this be approved based on phase 3 data? Will it not? Especially for companies that have been eyeing on accelerated approvals based on phase 2 data, it's going to be tough, because you, at this point in time, you don't really have a reliable forecast on will this still be available or not.
So you are Duke Capital Partners. You're seeing the funding side. So the biotech financing environment has been brutal lately, as you just mentioned, right? The venture capital and traditional equity have dried up, and I'm seeing royalty financing become the lifeline for a lot of oncology companies. They get large sums of non-dilutive capital upfront, but they're trading away a slice of future revenue, sometimes on potentially game-changing drugs. And recently, I was researching more of the player like Royalty Pharma, for example. Royalty Pharmas are focusing heavily on late stage and commercial oncology assets. So you've seen how these financing models affect strategy. Um, does the rise of royalty monetization of late stage oncology assets help or hinder innovation? Because what we're seeing now is essentially almost exclusive financing of late stage assets. So are companies trading long-term upside for short-term survival, or is this just smart risk management?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big topic, and we could probably spend the next hour talking about this. Um, Again, in an ideal world, like the smaller biotech companies would have like a lot of different sources and channels for non-dilutive funding. But this is not the reality that we see right now. From an investor perspective, this totally makes sense. It's a smart move to especially pick late stage assets. Those are usually as much de-risked as possible. At the same time, you have a de-risked investment model. So that's a smart idea. But from the smaller one, like the one receiving the money,
Mhm.
it all boils down to what other options do you actually have currently? If I mean, you need the money to survive, and if this is the only way for you to get the funding, like to go through phase 3 trials, for example, you probably gonna pick those, even if it means giving up a slice of the blockbuster pie you've got in your pipeline. Um, this doesn't solve the early stage funding issue. It Yeah, I don't really have an answer for you if that this makes it worse or not, because we still struggle on moving early stage companies forward to this stage. Yeah,
So essentially, what you're saying is, if we want to continue the investment and funding of early stage assets, we still need to rely on the traditional funding sources, the VC capital, and for that, it means that we will have to wait until this policy uncertainty this winter is over, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so now I'm wondering when I think about the science. So does this funding crunch actually force better science, or does it just favor certain types of approaches when it comes to oncology specifically?
Well, I I think um, uh, yeah, I like to believe that strong science will always find some way to prevail, although that's probably a bit naive. Um, it certainly, when investors are being picky, it certainly leads them to make less risky bets and probably place the money where everyone else is putting it. So we might see them jumping like on the next hype train,
Hmm.
and invest in the 25th bispecific or another ADC in HER2 positive breast cancer.
Hmm.
There's probably not a lot wrong with this, but it might obviously lead to some more innovative approaches being benched or shelved elsewhere. Yeah.
So you mentioned the hype cycle, and it brings me to another topic that I had in mind, which is, so we had CAR T therapies. CAR T was the next best big thing. Then ADCs. Now everyone is talking about radiopharmaceuticals. So from the investment side, I'm seeing these new modalities driving larger deals, and buyers are focusing on platforms that can generate multiple products, not just line extensions or single assets. So the question is, how do you separate this genuine innovation that we really need for the patient community from investment fashion?
Yeah, I mean, we're a pretty data-driven field, so if whatever asset you're looking at has the best case clinical data, that already tells you a lot of the story. Beyond that, preclinical data might be helpful, but that's probably as far as you can get. I mean, especially in early stage funding, it probably boils down to like who's doing it. Have they been doing this before? Do they have any special expertise? And then what are they targeting? So, like I said, like is it the 17th Me Too drug in a crowded field? Like maybe sure might work, but there's a lot of competition, or is this a totally new approach in a niche indication where they might have some standalone value?
So when it comes to, what makes you believe that this modality has real staying power versus just being the flavor of the year? The clinical data, or what?
Yeah, absolutely. But ultimately, clinical data. But kind of like we talked about, often case, like especially in early stage, you don't have a lot of clinical data. In best case, you might have a mouse. Of course, biology. If you have a clear mechanism of action that kind of tells you why this drug should work. But again, this is biotech. It's inherently risky across all stages, and like it's oftentimes a simply arbitrary good or bad outcome.
Okay, so this was all the investment perspective, the financing perspective. So if we think about this innovation trends as clinicians, so you've seen this as a practicing oncologist. When you look at ADCs, when you look at bispecifics, CAR T, radiopharma, what excites you the most today? And from the practical implementation, I know that we both are stepped out or are stepping out of clinical medicine, but still, in terms of the practical implementation, what would keep you up at night?
Yeah, I think I'm actually, to be honest, excited about all of those coming to market, just because it's like a lot of fresh modalities and a lot of new hope out there. I'm a big fan, just me personally, of bispecifics, just because I like the approach, and I think what we've seen so far. I mean, it has been a bit controversial, but I kind of like the data that we've seen from Summit/Kiso. And I keep telling this everyone who does not want to hear it, that BMS was, what have they been paying, like 11, 12, 13 billion to BioNTech just for a partnership on their bispecific. They must have seen something that they really like about it. So I like bispecifics. CAR Ts are obviously a great thing. But like now we can talk about the implementation issue. I think CAR Ts, at least in the current state, have a lot of practical challenges for scalability, manufacturing, and implementation, especially when we think about everything beyond academic centers. But there's a lot of work being done in this field, like on allo CAR Ts. So I'm pretty optimistic that we'll be able to solve this, as well as bring CAR Ts hopefully to some kind of solid tumors. Radiopharmaceuticals, I like them a lot, just because they're a bit different. And I've been doing a lot of work and research on neuroendocrine tumors. And this is one of the indications where we already seen them in action for some time now. ADCs, I probably my subjective perspective, but I think they're very effective. But I've got concerns about toxicity here, probably because I've been burned by a few cases of interstitial lung disease, patients treated with those.
I see. Interesting. So now let's bring this back to patients. Oh, by the way, before I move to patients, I had an idea that I think that we need to really focus as an industry on new biology and new targets. I think there's a lot of development happening right now, looking at the same targets, at the same biology, and I do think that with the advent of artificial intelligence and AI-driven drug design, this is so critical that we start moving beyond what we already have. Now let's talk about patients. So here we in the United States have access to the best oncology care in the world. But in practice, you already know the disparities are massive. So there's no simple way for patients to find and enroll in clinical trials. Compassionate use exists on paper, but it's really difficult to come by in reality. We've been talking about decentralized trials and hybrid trial designs for several years now. They're still gaining ground. I would say they're still more theoretical than practical. So, from your perspective on the clinic floor, how much of this progress is actually translating into real opportunities for patients, and especially the patients that reside in rural communities in the United States?
Yeah, unfortunately, not a lot. And this is definitely not a particularly a US problem. I think it's a global issue. But let's talk about the US at this point. Um, Kind of like you said, you've got academic centers, majorly located on the coasts, but in between, you've got a lot of healthcare deserts where not only access to trials is limited, but just plain access to treatments or to specialists. So that's definitely a huge issue that we need to work on. So it we don't help patients by just advancing the science, but neglecting the access piece of it. And yeah, you said that decentralized trials might be an opportunity here to have patients not drive like 3 to 4 hours every time they need to see a study visit. Um, Hopefully, technological advances, let's call it this, like telehealth, wearables, electronic PROs, might all be things to help mitigate this, but this is a big and concerning issue. Yeah.
But in general, are you hopeful for the oncology in general and the industry for the next decade?
Well, I'm usually optimistic,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and well, but this is something that we need to work on. It's not going to solve itself, and I don't have like the one brilliant idea on how to solve this,
Mhm.
but it's definitely something to keep in mind.
You're definitely more optimistic than me.
Okay.
So, well, let's think about the. I'm a big picture person, so I will give you this big picture question before we wrap up this conversation. So, let's say 5, 10 years from now, we meet again. What is your prediction? Are we heading toward a more streamlined, effective system, or are we going to see more complexity and fragmentation?
Definitely the latter. I definitely think like oncology is getting more and more complex. We're steering towards more granularity. I mean, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's probably a good thing that we're kind of moving towards more personalized treatment options for patients, where we don't treat any lung cancer as lung cancer, but look at the underlying mutations and everything. But
Yeah.
at the same time, this is going to be a change that cannot probably not be managed in rural areas. This requires a lot of expertise, and you will usually find those only in academic centers on the coasts, and not. I don't want to insult any state, so I don't name anyone. But in those healthcare deserts,
Yeah.
you will have a tough time living up to this standard.
That is true. And I think that, again, in fact, if we do not pay more attention to the access piece, I think things are only going to get worse. I think the gap between the innovation acceleration and actually access to that innovation is going to increase. Um, that's why when I talk to my colleagues or clients, I still see that the medical affairs piece is medical affairs piece, the communication piece, and health economics continues to be this underdog within pharma. And I do think that that piece needs to be front and center to actually close the gap between the access to innovation and actual innovation itself. Um, what do you think?
And yeah, I just wanted to add that, especially in the US, you have like a lot of other players at the table, like between payers and providers.
Mhm.
And although their incentives are not usually not often or not in every case aligned. So there's a lot of different moving pieces that need to fit together to improve access here.
Yeah, I agree completely. So my take, if I were to think 5 to 10 years, so my take is that we're going to move toward personalized oncology. I think this move is inevitable. We already have access to molecular profiling. I do think we're going to have targeted agents, individualized immunotherapies. Um, I do think that these modalities are going to shape treatment for more cancer types than ever before. Um, but besides the access piece, I also think that the biggest opportunities will come from combining that innovation and innovative science with new patient experiences, where the patient experience is actually seamless, where care coordination is not a theoretical concept, and for patients, it actually is easy to navigate from a primary care physician to a specialty care. So I hope, as a medical doctor, that we're going to focus more on the access piece, the experience piece, and the economics.
Yeah, I totally agree. We often forget that survival and, like you said, patient experience is not only driven by better newer drugs, but it's a lot about um, how can we even increase access to patients? How can we mitigate side effects, and like the whole supportive care environment in a way that patients are actually benefiting from it.
Yeah. So we're almost at time, but I really want to take one question from our listeners, if you don't mind. Um,
Sure.
this question has been popping up recently quite often, and I'm actually participating in an interview on this topic in a couple of weeks. Um, what do you think on American competitiveness in oncology drug development against the biotech rise in China?
Well, okay, I think it's undeniable that we see a lot of great science coming out of China lately, and they successfully made the transition from doing a lot of Me Too drugs into original science. I think all of the PD-1 VEGF bispecifics that we've seen in the news lately this year, they all originated in China, like the ones that Pfizer and Merck bought, Kiso, of course, but also BioNTech ones. They're all coming out of China. And um, well, from a patient perspective, this is not necessarily bad, right? Um,
Yeah.
I think where we see a misalignment, and now we head again to the regulatory side of it, is that FDA, for good reasons, requires trials to be run in an American or at least a Western population. But we need to find better frameworks and concepts to not have to rerun trials over and
Mhm.
over again, because this is just a waste of time, resources, and unfortunately, patience. Um, I just realized this is not exactly what you asked, but
Yeah.
it's my opinion on that. So American competitiveness, I think the US is still very competitive in the biotech space, and there's a lot of good science happening here.
Mhm.
But the funding environment, that definitely needs to improve, and have to face the reality that the US is not the sole big player in biotech anymore.
I think that we operate in general under different regulatory and ethical frameworks. But at the same time, I see the investors that I work with, they are in this limbo where we're not sure if the investment climate is going to improve here in the United States. So maybe we should invest in biotech in Europe or in China, and also for other reasons. It's very interesting to watch. So let's keep monitoring this space. Well, it's been awesome having this conversation with you, Oliver. I always like talking to you. So for folks who want to follow your work or connect with you, where can they find you? And do you provide any services what they can talk to you about?
Yeah, of course. So I think the best and probably easiest way to just reach me would be right here on LinkedIn. Um, yeah, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk about anything, of course, oncology, clinical development, strategy, my opinions on a lot of things. So yeah, just reach out and I'm happy to connect.
Fantastic. Well, Oliver is a good friend, but also is a great competitor on LinkedIn.
Appreciate that.
Fantastic. Well, if everyone wants to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Julien Willard, or my personal website, julienwillard.com. Well, thanks to everyone who joined us today. And Oliver, thank you for such a thoughtful conversation early in the morning. The intersection of clinical experience that we both have and now investment perspective is exactly what this industry needs more of. And I also think that now that we discussed all of the pieces, I think we need to double down on the access piece, on the medical affairs, economics, and patient experience.
Thanks for having me, Julien. It was great.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Take care.